everyone, it's Katie Dunn with the City of Norton, and we're back for our next digital outdoor chat. And today we're going to be joining Chelsea and Justin Barnes, and they are going to be talking to us about the lessons they've learned while backpacking.
Hi, my name is Chelsea Barnes.
And I'm Justin Barnes.
And we're here to tell you about a lot of the things that we've learned while backpacking over the years. And we're going to tell you our top 10 lessons learned from our mistakes backpacking. Justin and I have been backpacking for about 8 years. The first time we ever went backpacking was in North Cascades in Washington.
Our first real backpack, because we'd done a couple kind of training things, which is probably a good idea, but just like our first real more than overnight backpack.
Yeah. We did a short backpack in the Uaris with the Sierra Club to learn how to backpack, and then we did a 2-nighter in the Uaris by ourselves as a training trip before we went to the North Cascades. What I like most about backpacking is just getting to be out in nature all day and all night and really kind of disconnect from the world and feel kind of at peace in nature.
But I don't know, I always feel kind of accomplished after we do a long trip. So that's, beyond just kind of being outside away from people and everything. It's kind of nice to feel like you've done something after you finish it.
There are a lot of resources on the internet for helping you to learn how to backpack and your packing lesson, gear reviews, all sorts of information. But one of the most helpful things that we found is we bought this book, The Backpacker's Handbook, and we read through it and still use it today, and it just has A to Z how to backpack, just everything that you could possibly need to learn. Of course, REI is a really good resource, especially for understanding how different kinds of gear and what kind of gear you need for different types of hiking or backpacking, and then always the where you're going to go backpack, the website for that national park or that national forest where you're going, always use that as a resource as well to help you understand the trails and the rules and regulations for where you're hiking. All right, lesson number 1 is be prepared to fix stuff because you're definitely going to break stuff. We have a repair kit that we take with us on every single trip and always make sure to resupply. I keep mine in this very ratty Ziploc bag, but you can certainly find kits prepared for you. But some of the important things to include are a sewing kit, needle and thread.
For instance, I had it on one of our trips, the side of my shoes started coming apart and Chelsea had to sew it back together.
He's very lucky to have a wife that knows how to sew. We've got a field repair kit. This comes with a waterproof sealant that you can use on pretty much any kind of seal on your tent, on your shoes, on your pack, and it kind of acts as a glue that is waterproof. And then you can buy these kinds of it's like duct tape, but for your tent or for your pack. It's called Tenacious tape, and there's probably other kind of brands out there too. But it's really convenient for if you happen to rip a hole in your tent.
Which is surprisingly easy to do. It's fairly easy to slip on a rock, and if your tent is hanging outside your pack, you can tear it that way. It's also easy to forget that it's really windy, and when you're taking your tent down, if there's nothing in it, it might blow away, which has happened to us. Both of those things have happened to us.
Then I've got rubber bands, which just come in handy for all sorts of things. Spare batteries, of course. Always need a few spares of those.
For headlamps, that is.
For headlamps, yep. And then we keep some bungee cords in case the pack breaks or something. They're really convenient for holding things to your pack.
Yeah, like a buckle, which has happened. You can break a buckle.
And then we also always keep a few carabiners in our pack for hooking things like the bungee cords together or for holding your pack together. And the last thing that's in here are emergency fire sticks, which we've never used, but I keep carrying them anyway, just in case.
Lesson 2 is have a reliable stove, and simpler is better. So this is our stove that we use now. We actually used to have a different kind of stove that we initially bought because it seemed like it held, you could carry more fuel with it. But as it turns out, it was just super complicated and difficult to set up. And there was one time when we had a really long kind of, just very strenuous day, and we were really kind of bummed out by the end of it. And it was getting cold, and we couldn't get it lit. And so avoiding that is pretty important because we were pretty miserable already, and that did not help. So the stove we have now is just one of these little pocket rockets, they're called. You can buy several different varieties of them, but they're kind of just basically like butane gas or some sort of compressed gas mix. They're simple. You literally you can't make a mistake with them. They'll light pretty much anywhere. Even when it's windy, you probably shouldn't have a problem. The fuel is pretty available at any camp store you might want to go to. So it's pretty easy. Like if you're flying somewhere, you can pretty much always find a place where you can get fuel. And they're small and they're light. Screw it on. And even like one of these containers will probably last you like a week for backpacking or more. But they even make larger ones that if you wanted to go further. But usually, we'll use one of these for at least like 5 or 6 meals on a trip, and it'll still be half full. I'm not gonna light it. You're not gonna be able to see it actually. You can hear it though. And that's why they call it a pocket rocket.
All right, lesson number 3 is don't lose track of your stuff. Know where all your belongings are at all times. There's a couple lessons built into this. One is it's really easy to lose small things. For example, on our first backpacking trip of like 5 nights, the first night Justin was washing his socks in the stream by our campsite, and he lost one of his socks. Luckily, we had brought 2 pairs of socks. It's always important to bring 2 pairs of socks because socks are very important, and you never know when you might lose one.
But it is really easy to get a little bit careless if you're not thinking about it. So just kind of things like always zipping all of the zippers up and never leaving stuff on the ground. Like it's pretty tempting to kind of set, say, a Swiss Army knife on the ground, but if it gets dark or if leaves get kicked over it, you'll never find it again. And these are all things that are pretty important. So just always keep things in pockets and try to be as consistent as possible with where you put them.
Yeah, and this also goes for your food too. So a lot of times if you're hiking in bear country, there will be lots of signs out about keeping track of your food, and that's not just at night. You need to keep track of your food all throughout the day, and you don't want to set your food down even 20 feet away from you because a bear could just swoop in and grab it. And it's not just bears. So even if you're not hiking in bear country, this is important because things like squirrels, groundhogs, marmots, all sorts of animals. Marmots are very aggressive. Lots of animals, are interested in your food, especially where backpacking and hiking are common because they get used to the idea that people have food. So always keep your food nearby and know where it is. And if you're not able to keep it on you, make sure it's in a bear-proof container or other kind of animal-proof container.
Okay, lesson 4 is protect yourself from the sun. That obviously means bringing sunscreen. It means paying attention and actually applying it diligently. But it also means, bringing a hat because, oftentimes it's especially difficult to actually, say, get the sunscreen on a spot on your neck where it's not going to rub off because your pack is moving around or you don't, you don't end up with kind of the part of your shirt moving around a little bit and you get a little strip of very sunburned skin. We came across a girl when we were in Zion who apparently had not adhered to this, and she had like her socks wrapped all the way up her arms because her forearms had gotten so sunburned the day before that she couldn't even like walk around with her arms out in the open in the sun. So sunburns are pretty miserable all the time, but they're especially miserable when you're backpacking, especially when you've got things like straps rubbing all around. It's pretty nasty if it happens to you. So you don't want to ruin your trip.
And sunglasses are important too. All right, lesson number 5, be careful unstaking your tent in the wind. Justin and I had one of our most epic backpacking trips hiking on part of the John Muir Trail up to Mount Whitney, which is the highest peak in the contiguous United States. The night before we went up to Mount Whitney, we were camping at what's called Guitar Lake, which is a really popular camp spot for everyone who's trying to get to Mount Whitney. So we got up early in the morning to try to get up there as early as possible, because when you're going up to high peaks, it's you have risks of thunderstorms. So we got up at about 4 in the morning, and it was really dark out still, and it was very windy because we were already up really high close to the peak. And so we unpacked our tent and started packing up our bags and left the tent up as we were packing our packs. And so then I took the stakes out of the tent without taking the tent down, and then a big gust of wind came and blew the tent over, and it just toppled and toppled and toppled all over the campsite. And when we packed it up in the dark and didn't really check our tent, but luckily that was our last night of camping, because when we got home and I unpacked the tent from our trip, there were 5 or 6 holes or tears in there that I had to repair at home. Luckily I had my repair kit, so if we did have another night of camping, I could have fixed up the holes. But it definitely hurts your tent to have holes in it, so I don't recommend it. So just be careful anytime you're out camping in a windy spot. You just want to be careful as you're taking your tent down and putting your tent up, that you're being mindful of the wind, and grab a partner to help you if you need.
Lesson number 6. It's actually kind of 2 lessons in one. So one is spicy food actually doesn't really taste that good on the trail, probably for a variety of reasons. But as it turns out, it seems like it would taste good, but when your lips are chapped or you're really thirsty, it doesn't really seem to work. So we've kind of learned to avoid things like chili peanuts or stuff like that. The other lesson is, if you are bringing your own food, not taking kind of some of the prepackaged meals and stuff like that. We often do that because we like a little more variety, and we found stuff that kind of tastes better than some of the prepackaged stuff. But if you're going to make your own recipes, test them out first. We've had a couple instances, or at least one really bad instance, where we used a marinade to add some flavor to, I think it was like some rice and beans. And as it turned out, it was a marinade that had a lot of black pepper in it, and it made it so spicy we couldn't eat it. So we probably ate half of it, and I think ended up throwing the rest away. So if you're going to make your own little recipes, test them out first, because you may not really appreciate how salty it's going to be or how spicy it's going to be if you don't do it first.
Lesson number 7 is know where you're going to sleep every night, but also be prepared to sleep anywhere. So the best thing you can do is know exactly where each of your campsites are going to be each night. That's easier in some places like national parks where there are designated camping zones, but in other places like in wilderness areas, there aren't really designated camping spots, and so you just kind of have to do your research ahead of time to know where are going to be good areas to camp, where there's going to be enough flat ground to put your tent, and where there won't be any rocks. What you don't want is a circumstance where you haven't planned where you're going to hike, or you decide to go a little further one day and it's starting to get dark and you can't find a good camp spot, because it's no fun to set up your camp in the dark.
Yeah, and I think finding a good campsite, oftentimes it really pays off to be just a little bit more conservative in terms of when you find a good spot. stopping in a place where there is water or that is sheltered, that's kind of out of the wind, that has a nice flat spot. Because, you know, as it turns out, sometimes you go a little bit further and you think you're going to find somewhere, and you don't. And it's pretty tough if you, say, walked a couple miles past the good spot to have to walk another couple miles back when it's starting to get dark. So yeah, things like water, you know, flat ground, sheltered, all that stuff, you know, you can oftentimes find out information about, even in wilderness areas, where good spots are. You know, people will post things online about where they found spots, but I think usually, you know, when you find a good spot and it's getting kind of late in the day and you're just not sure, you're better off being conservative and just stopping there. Lesson 8, plan where to hang your food before it starts getting dark. We've had a couple of times where, you know, we were using a bear bag, and as it turns out, when we got to where our campsite is, there weren't a whole lot of, you know, really good spots. You know, there just weren't like a lot of trees, especially at high elevations. That can often be a problem. When it does start to get dark, it can get dark pretty fast, and you really don't want to be in a position of being in bear country and having your food on the ground or having your food vulnerable. So, you know, I think one of the things we've learned is, like, right when we start setting up camp, or even when we're getting close to camp, kind of being on the lookout for places where you can hang your food that are going to be good spots, because, you know, once it starts to get dark, it's virtually impossible to actually find a good spot.
So, you know, when you're out hiking in bear country or in other places where you need to protect your food from animals, there are about 3 different ways that you can store your food to have it be safe from animals. One is hanging your bear bag from a tree. One is taking a bear canister like this to store your food in. And then sometimes when you're hiking, there will be good bear canisters at campsites, so like a bear locker is sometimes what it's called, where you can, it's a shared metal container where all the campers are supposed to put their food. You don't want to necessarily rely on those, because, you know, if you have to stop before you get to the campsite, if you're not at a campsite where there is a bear locker, you need to have a backup option, so either a bear bag or a bear canister. These are a little heavier than just taking a bag and some rope, but we found that it's worth the weight, because it can be really hard to find good trees to hang a bear bag from. So just plan ahead for where you're going to hang your food, and making sure you have proper storage for your food, and don't wait until it gets dark to find a tree to hang your bear bag from.
Yeah. Lesson number 9, bring a map. In fact, bring multiple maps. You know, oftentimes, even if you kind of know, you know, more or less where you're camping each night and more or less know the route, you know, it'll still give you a little bit of a sense of security to actually have a map and be able to kind of check where you are at a given time on a given day. I think it should be obvious. Yes, you should have a map, but we've actually come across a couple of backpackers that did not have maps, which we found kind of shocking.
Yeah, and you know, we've taken. On some trips, we've taken 3 different maps that have different kinds of levels of detail. So, you know, it's always better to have more information, and really you don't want to have just one map, because what if, you know, you drop it somewhere, or what if you spill some water on it or something like that makes it unusable. So even having 2 copies of your map is good. And of course, there's lots of apps these days that you can download on your phone. You know, we typically, when we're out backpacking, you might not have a signal, or you might just not want to be on your phone, but having your phone as a backup option with a downloaded map on it can be a good lifesaver in a situation where you're lost, or you've somehow lost your maps. So if you've got the resource, it's a good one to have with you.
Yeah, and we've actually even had an experience where hiking on a relatively less maintained trail, there was a place where we basically had to detour, and it was not immediately clear exactly how we were supposed to kind of detour around this spot where the trail wasn't open and get back to the trail. And having that map downloaded on her phone was actually really helpful, because otherwise we were just kind of, you know, more or less wandering around, thinking we knew what direction the trail was in, but not really knowing.
Lesson number 10 is don't pack too much food and don't pack too little food. So bring the right amount of food. On our very first long backpacking trip, I was so worried about us getting hungry that I figured out how many calories we would burn throughout the week, and I was trying to pack that many calories. But you're never going to eat as many calories as you burn during a backpacking trip. You're going to eat about the same amount of food that you eat typically during the week. If you're doing a big long through hike on the Appalachian Trail, you might start to eat more calories as your body adjusts, but typically on a 3-day or 1 week long backpacking trip, you're going to eat about the same amount of food that you usually do during your regular life. But you always want to make sure to have a little bit of extra food in case you get lost or in case something happens to your food. So that's not to say don't pack a little bit of extra, but just be mindful that if you pack too much food, your pack's going to be really heavy.
And you may not be able, if you're trying to hang it, find a branch that will support your 25-pound bag of food that has twice as much as you need, which was our experience once.
Thanks everyone for joining us today and listening to Chelsea and Justin talk about the different lessons they've learned while backpacking, and we hope to be back soon with more digital outdoor chats.